Hello and welcome everyone to latest episode of ravisinghblog.in. This is Ravi Singh. Thank you very much for joining me in this video. And today in this video we are going to talk about GitHub action in MuleSoft, and I'm going to talk about how to implement GitHub action, what are the importance of GitHub action CI/CD in MuleSoft or in generic for all the application. Then I will also show you a demo how to implement GitHub action using the latest MuleSoft runtime, which is 4.6.7 as we are speaking. The 4.7 is also released, but I will be taking example of 4.6 in this example. And if you are already using 4.4 as a runtime, there are some changes happened with respect to CI/CD. I'm going to show you that, and along with that I will also be mentioning the best practices for implementing GitHub action in MuleSoft. So before I proceed any further, I would appreciate if you subscribe to my channel and click the bell icon so that you'll get the notification whenever I upload any new video. And in the coming days I'm going to upload lot of interesting videos as I'm learning it in the process, and I'm also using it in my project, so I'm going to show you that. So let me give a background from where I got this idea for the this video. So I was implementing GitHub action for the CI/CD implementation in MuleSoft application, and I faced some challenges. There are very less materials or documentation available on the internet, especially with the new Mule runtime. You need to make some small config changes. So I struggle a bit, and then I thought, why not? Whatever I learned in the process, I should share with the community. So that's why I got this idea to create this video. So let's quickly see first, before we go into the actual implementation, just a brief intro why we need CI/CD. So we all know we have a manual process. You can either deploy from any point studio or create a jar and then deploy directly on the CloudHub or your fabric, or if you are using a local runtime. Why you need CI/CD and why you need to invest? So there are a lot of changes recently happened with the automation for the application, and CI/CD is also a part of DevOps, and it's very important. And let's see the pointers why we need CI/CD. So automation, the first point is automation, and of course there are so many things happening very quickly in your application. There are so many builds going on, there are agile process involved, and there are maybe sometime 2 or 3 release happen in 1 month for your application. You cannot manage so many releases without automation, and CI/CD comes as a package for the automation for your complete build, deployment, testing. It could be code scanning, code quality. All those things can be clubbed together and can be done in one go the moment you check in your application. So if you are building, or at least you are working in an agile environment and you have so many builds are going on parallelly, you need to automate the process using CI/CD. Faster delivery, of course. Earlier we had a waterfall model where maybe in a 1 month or 3 month one release goes to production, but now we have so many deployment happens in a month, in a week. We need to have a faster process where we can deliver the code to the client, and CI/CD helps you to quickly develop, build and deploy the application either on the dev environment, QA environment or prod environment. It happens very quickly. Consistency, of course, we face this problem as a developer in the past where sometimes there are different version of code deployed in one environment, then at some point there are different code in QA, and it's very difficult to coordinate between these different environment. Now once you automate this process, there are no chances of human error, and whatever the latest code you check in will only go to the respective environment. Collaboration, of course, the team size is, if you have a bigger team size and so many people are working on different code or maybe the same code, all of them can collaborate, create a single channel through which the deployment goes to different environment, and that's where CI/CD can help you. Scalability, of course, more and more application grows into one project, it becomes very big, challenging. If you still follow a manual process, then there could be chances of error. You may have to also increase the resources to manage those many applications for their release and deployment process, whereas CI/CD can save you that cost by creating automation for the deployment and the build process. Rollback is another challenge where sometimes, when you have a issue on production, you need to roll back to a particular version. You don't know which version it is because you are still managing it manually, and there could be chances that wrong version of code can go to production. Whereas in CI/CD process, we indicate the different version. It is stored, let's say last 10 version is stored in repository. You know exactly which version to switch back. You indicate that version, and CI/CD process can roll it back. So that also makes it very easy. Compliance and auditing is another challenge where uh, we need to know who deployed what code at which time, and we need to track the changes. Now with CI/CD, we know exactly who checked in at what time, which code goes into dev, QA or prod. We can easily trace it and find the issue quickly. As well as in case of auditing or compliance, we can easily trace the event. So that also it helps. Okay then, so let's see the second part where we are going to show you actual demo using a sample MuleSoft application. We are going to implement CI/CD. The code repository will be GitHub, and the CI/CD tool in this case will be Github Action. So let's deep dive into the code first. So let me give you an overview of how the structure or how the flow will be. So first we need to set up the GitHub for your code repository. So you need to first create the code on your local Anypoint Studio or Anypoint Code Builder, whatever it is, and then you can move that code into GitHub. The second part where I will be just briefly discussing about the branching strategy, though this is not a part where we are going to discuss the GitHub branching strategy, but normally what we follow is you have a main branch, and then you have a developer or development branch, and then you have a release branch. And the development branch is for the dev environment or your local environment, and the release branch will be for the QA environment. So initially you push the code into your developer branch, and then you deploy the code on dev environment. Once the code is validated, then you will move that code to release branch by merging that code to release branch. And this is how the CI/CD will work here. So the moment you check in the code in the dev, the code will be deployed to the dev branch, the dev environment. The moment you will check your code to the release branch, the code will move to QA environment. So that's the branching strategy you can follow, but that is not mandatory. Every organization have their own different policy. Okay, so once you have your code repository ready and the branch is specified, the next part is GitHub action workflow. So all the GitHub action works on the workflow file. So you need to create a workflow folder. Inside that you have to create a YML file. YML file will have different component. Here it is already mentioned. It has the trigger point, the first point where you will trigger the job based on a specific condition. I'll show you using a sample application. Then you have a build phase where you actually will create a jar file using the application code. You will also have a testing stage where you will be running all your unit test cases, and then create your quality document. It can be unit test report, the code coverage, etc. Then you can either send that to a specified email ID, or you can also store it on the GitHub itself where you can view it later. You also have an option to either reject the flow if the code coverage is less than a minimum percentage. The last part is the deploy. where you will be deploying the code actually on the CloudHub, or if you have a legacy or in-house server, you can deploy it. If you have a fabric, then you can deploy it there, runtime fabric. So these are the three main component. Along with that, you may see optional thing, for example, code scanning, and then code quality check. Those things also you can place it in the CI/CD. So let's go to a sample application, and then I will show you what are the changes you have to make if you have to switch to 4.6 runtime version, and there is a specific option you need to choose, LTS or H. Okay, so for the demo purpose, I will be taking a very basic example, a very basic application. You can see here I have a scheduler, I have a set payload, and I have a logger. This is very simple application. I also created a test unit case, which is a very basic, where I'm just running the flow and just checking if the payload is equal to some number. For here, in case I'm just comparing payload is equal to 2, just for a demo purpose. Okay, so this is my application, and then of course I have already set up my application in the GitHub. You can see here in the GitHub I have this application set up. Now, two very important thing. First, you have to modify the pom.xml. So if you open pom.xml, I'll show you there are some configuration changes you have to do. First thing is the name of the application that you have to specify here. These things you are already aware, so I'm not going to discuss that, but here the important part is this app runtime. So I'm using 4.6 and Java 8, so you have to denote, or you have to indicate it like this. Earlier, if you see 4.4, the way it is described is 4.4 here, but now it is changed, so you have to indicate it like this. Then you have to make sure you are using the correct plugin version for MUnit and the Maven. So please check it respectively. As I'm discussing it today, the latest version is Mule plugin version is 4.2.1 and the MUnit is 3.2.1, but it may change by the time you see this. Okay, so let's move forward. Now the next part which you need to set up is the CloudHub configuration. It is used to indicate or to show like what are the component that has to be set up for the CloudHub. Here I am using the target deployment model as pure CloudHub, but it can be different for your application. But here, if you can see, there is one different thing which I have used here is release channel. So if you have remembered earlier, I talked about there are two release channel present in the latest CloudHub environment. One is LTS, one is Edge. So in this demo, I've taken LTS, but it could be Edge also. Now you see these configuration tag you need to add in your POM according to your code. So release channel, and then the other part is Java version. I've indicated at 8. Other thing remains same, username, password. For the CloudHub, you have environment name I've indicated here itself, but you can make it a configurable. You have worker type, region, workers, and object store. And if you have anything like environment property, that you will indicate it here. Now one thing, if you notice, where are the password? If you see here, the username is anypoint.username, but where is this field? So what you have to do is in GitHub Action, this is the GitHub Action interface, and you can see it here in the action option. So before you start it any further, go to settings. You need to set up some environment variable or the environment password. Okay, so if you go to secret and variables and click on action, you will see how to set up the secret or the password you need it for your GitHub Action jobs. So for example, here I have Anypoint platform password, Anypoint platform username, decryption key, Nexus password and the Nexus username. These all variables is set up here because these are the secrets of your application. These are the confidential password. So all the sensitive password which you don't want to show in your job or on your script, you need to come here, click on new repository secret, and then you need to add it. And then in the actual GitHub action script, you need to call this, where the password will be called and will be used within the application. So this is very important. Before you start creating your jobs, you need to set up all these things. Okay. So now we set up these secrets. We set up our pom.xml, what we discussed so far. With, remember, release channel is something you need to change, and the Java version you have to indicate with a specified or the naming convention has to be correct. If you will denote the wrong naming convention or anything different from what is required, your job will fail during the build. Okay, so two things we set up till now, pom.xml and the secret. What is the next step? So once you check in your code in GitHub, you need to set up this maven or m2 file. Okay, this m2 will contain your settings.xml. This is the same thing you must have seen on your local also. So this is required during the maven run. So here what you need to do is, if you can see here, I'm using the Nexus username and the password here. Okay, the repository. So remember, when you are creating or you start creating your CI/CD jobs, you have to have a Nexus username and password available to you for the Mule Enterprise repository, which is this one. If you don't have it, you will not be able to complete your CI/CD job. So to get this Nexus username and the password, the process is you have to create a ticket for the MuleSoft support and get this username and the password. But remember, until you are a customer of MuleSoft, you won't get this username and the password. Okay, so you need to get the password, you need to set up your settings.xml, and then you are ready to create your job. Okay, once you set up your settings.xml, next part is, in your code repository, you have to create a folder .github. Inside that, create a folder workflow, and then inside that there will be a YML file, and this is the core file. This is called GitHub action script, which will decide how your flow will be running. Okay, so if you see here, I will just give a brief, like most of you are already aware, but I will just quickly give a brief. So here, first step is, or first line is, how this flow will be triggered. So here, if you see, I have indicated once you push the code into the main branch, either push or pull, the GitHub action script will be called. Now, if you have a different script for QA environment, for dev environment, and maybe for prod environment, these naming convention will be different. For example, for a dev branch, as I discussed earlier, if you need to check if the branch name contains dev, then only trigger this flow. If someone will, let's say, checked in any code in release branch, then this flow will not be triggered for the dev branch, and vice versa. So here, for the demo purpose, I have indicated main branch, but in practical, we never check in directly in the main branch. The code is always merged to the main branch, and most of the time the code in production is deployed from release branch and not from main branch. So you may have a different trigger condition, but this is just for the understanding purpose. Now once you do that, we'll go to the test part. Here I have mentioned the test part first and then the build part, but it can be, you can have build first and test, both are fine. I mean, there is nothing wrong, but I have indicated test because most of the time it is considered better to run the test and then run the build. So here I have indicated the test, and the test is going to use the M2 repository. M2 repository is where you will have, all those settings is placed, and the command I have mentioned. If you see Java version also, I have mentioned you will have, let me show you the actual Maven command where it is. So yeah, so here it is, Maven test. And if you are wondering why I mentioned dskip unit test, this is because I'm going to show you on my personal GitHub account, and I do not have Nexus repository set up because that is only available for the MuleSoft customer. But in real project or real MuleSoft support or real MuleSoft customer, you will not have dskip because you want to run your munit test script. So you have to set up the Nexus username correctly, and then you have to run the Maven test so that your munit report will be created. Okay, but here I am skipping it because I don't have Nexus repository for my local environment is available. Okay, once you have test done, then the next part is the build. And if you see build, the only thing which is changes, I have created the package part first, ambient package, and then the next part is ambient. So as you can see, we have ambient package that is going to create the compiled code into a package with a jar. Okay, so that is mentioned here, and of course we are placing that in the artifacts. Now the last part is the deploy, and this is here that pom.xml configuration is used. We already set up everything there. The only thing now what we need is the mvn deploy command, which is actually going to deploy. Of course I am skipping the unit test. As I said, I cannot run because I don't have enterprise repository Nexus username and password. But then I will be mentioning the artifact name, which will be the actual jar name, and then username and the password, which is specified here, and of course the decryption key which is required for the environment configuration is passed here. All these things are coming from the secret which we have created earlier. Now here I'm using used Java 11 as example here, but it could be 8 or it could be 17 based on your configuration. So once you set up your build.yaml, now you are ready. Now you are ready to run this flow and see whether your code is actually creating the build and the deploy or not. So let's run this and see how it goes. Okay, so now we are ready to execute our GitHub action job and see how it goes. So the three things what we have discussed is now ready. The pom.xml is modified, the setting.xml is set with the Nexus username and the password, and your secrets, GitHub Actions secret is set up, and the last part is build.yaml, which is the sample GitHub action script, which is now ready. So as you can see, the trigger point in this GitHub action is checking into the main branch. So to trigger this event, what we need to do is check something in the main code. Okay, so we are going into the code again, and let me go to read.md, and I will modify something so that we can trigger this GitHub action job. So I go to the here I am going and I am just writing this is a test. Okay, and commit this directly into the main branch. So once you do that, that means you trigger the GitHub action. Now go to the action part, and you see here, because you updated readme.md, it's started. So now as you can see, I have three different portion or three different component in my GitHub action script: test, build and deploy. All three is visible here. So first part is testing is being executed, and if you have remembered, I have given dskip unit test in my Maven command because I do not have the Nexus repository. So the test is still getting executed, but this is skipping the actual report. But now we are in build part, so here actually the jar is being created and published. So let's see that. Let's wait for build to complete. It will take some time. Okay, so as you can see now, our build is also completed, and now we are in the deployment part. Okay, so this is very important. So I will go to my deployment, and you can see here my sample application is started getting deployed. And if I'll go inside this and I will go to setting, and you see here the release channel is long-term support and the runtime version is the latest, which is 4.6.7. So remember, when you have to switch to the long term or the edge, there are two different options. You can choose it according to your project or requirement, but you have to specify that plus the runtime version with the Java. So here I have used the Java 8. If you have remembered, I've given the runtime version with the Java 8. It could be 17, but remember, at this moment CloudHub is only supporting Java 8 and 17. There is no 11, so you have to choose the option accordingly. And all the other option which was there in none, which is 4.4.0, this is going to get retired in October. So the support is ending in October. So even if you have 4.4.0, you have to switch to either edge or long-term support. So here I have chosen the long-term support in the GitHub Action script. So if you have application hosted on 4.4.0, you need to make this change so that your application is deployed to new release channel. And as you can see, my application is now getting deployment, and this now has completed the CI/CD pipeline. So my application is tested, built, and deployed. The deployment is still happening, but it will complete soon. We'll just give a minute to this. Okay, so now you can see the application is being deployed. So we have completed the complete life cycle of GitHub Action. We have started with the test, build, and then deploy. Okay, and that's what all the point I mentioned here. The one point which I missed to mention is the monitoring and the notification, which is at the bottom. So when you start creating CI/CD pipeline, make sure at every stages you create a notification. It could be a Zoom, Slack channel, plus the email. Both should be triggered at every stages, and if there is any failure, it should notify the concerned DevOps team or the development team. Okay, so hope this small tutorial helped you with the GitHub Action configuration. And coming to the last part, and I just want to show you some of the best practices which I have just gathered it just to show you quickly. I mean, this is going to help you in creating a very good pipeline. The first part is the modular pipeline. So make sure when you create your GitHub Action script, every stage should be separated and created in module. For example, your build, test, deploy, all should have a separate stages, as you have seen in my sample script. Okay, security and secret management. Make sure there will be no password, no plain password in your GitHub Action script. Everything has to be encrypted and stored in the GitHub secrets. Okay, and remember, you cannot edit the item what you put in the GitHub secret. Once you go to the edit option, you will never see what the password or what password you used earlier. You have to enter a new password. So this is a very secure way to store your confidential data. Then the branching strategy, I already given a sample branching strategy. You have to have a branching strategy, and that also affect the GitHub Action, because that's how you trigger the flow. That's how you trigger the GitHub Action script. So make sure before you start CI/CD implementation, you have to have a clear branching strategies. How you're going to create a main branch, then a dev branch, then a release branch, and if there is any hotfix branch, you may create that based on your need. And then the testing strategy. So in GitHub action or in any CI/CD pipeline, you can specify how much coverage should be done in the code so that you will pass the pipeline or not. So MUnit or any kind of unit test are very important part, and make sure you create a process around it, and the developer should be aware that they need to create a certain percentage of MUnit, or else the code will never move to the dev or QA branch. Okay. You can also add integration testing based on your need. Now there is an option in build.yaml which you can set that a previous stage has to be completed, then you can go to the next step. For example, if the test stage will fail, then you will never move to build, or if your build is failed, you will never move to the test, or same case with the deployment. So remember that you need to stop the pipeline at a certain stage based on your process, and you enforce those process in your GitHub action script. Rollback mechanism. Now this is done differently in different organization, but what I have used is, in case of GitHub, when you create a CI/CD pipeline, there is an option which I have not shown in my sample script, is publish. So when you create a jar after the build, you can publish it on any Nexus repository or on the GitHub storage itself. GitHub gives you storage. It comes of course at a certain cost, but you can keep the, at least let's say, last 5 or 6 build jars onto the GitHub storage. And in case of rollback, you can use any of those version. You can create a separate script for that, like something like on-demand deployment, and then you can specify that build name or the release name and then deploy it in case of rollback. So that process also you can set it up in CI/CD. Version control, of course, those all version tagging, rollback and historical deployment are a part of version control. And as I mentioned earlier, monitoring are very important part. You need to send email and messages, chat messages to the concerned team in case of any failure. So make sure it is implemented. So this concludes our video tutorial, and I hope it solved some of your problems, because when I started implementing, I faced a lot of issues with the build part, testing part, the deployment part, and there are not many documentation available. So I will include my basic sample code also on GitHub so that you can access as a public repository. And of course, if you have any questions, suggestion, please use that comment section, or you can also tweet me, or you can also indicate the same on my email also. There is a way to message me also. I will provide that in the comment section, in the description section. Make sure you use that, and I wish you happy coding. And please, if you like this video, then do not forget to subscribe and give me a thumbs up. That will help me to create more engaging videos. Thank you very much for joining me today.